So we're doing an old school Toyota today, if we can make it happen.
Yes.
Okay. Intermittent no start.
Yeah, and it's cranking like it's out of time.
But it runs fine when it runs.
I mean, I didn't drive it because, you know, we pushed it in. It wouldn't start outside, even with a jump pack. But
and it was talking about it backfiring out of the exhaust, right? So crank, 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 backfire.
Not only that, crank, 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 whoa, and then the lights go dim, like it like whoa, stops cranking for a second, and then it's like out of the tailpipe, and you're like, what the heck's
Maybe
going
head
on
gasket?
here? And you turn it off and turn it back on, and it doesn't misfire at all, though. And then you can make it purr like a kitten, shut it off, and within seconds it'll do it again. So there can't be anything leaking down that fast, I don't think. And it doesn't misfire when it does start. So it's
you'd think
like,
you'd have a bunch of white smoke and stuff if that was the case.
Think. But I mean, like one of my suspicions, 147. I mean, is there a chance that, you know, a timing belt jumped the tooth and it confuses the spark?
Well, I mean, I've seen crazy stuff with one tooth off on a Honda.
Yeah.
You know, doing goofy stuff. So I think it's this one. I feel like we should have stuff, the way my brother described this, we should have stuff hooked up to this. The way he described the backfire and the way that it cranked, it really makes me want to look at cam crank signals, but now let's just try it. Let's just see what it does. Danner, the battery's dead. That gets us nowhere. I need to get a jump pack. I'll be right back. Oh, I heard the bang. I see an RPM. Interesting. Watch the fuel gauge. So I don't want to turn the key off just yet. I do have a check engine light on. It's right here. Just some bulb check stuff. Okay, if I turn the key off and back on, my brother said that it will start. So what I'd like to know while it's not starting is, what am I missing? And wow, fuel gauge just dropped down on that. I don't know if you caught that. That's weird. That's like timing type. But the fact that the tach moves and I now smell fuel says we're getting injection pulse. I don't want to turn the key off and back on. That's not going to help me. Where we are right now will help me. The fact that I smell fuel, that I see a tach moving, says we're getting an RPM signal to the engine computer. It says the fuel pump's probably running. It says the injectors are probably firing. This seems like ignition related based on the whoa,
crank, 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 whoa.
When it, like, you know, wrong time, the ignition firing, and then also the fact that it's not starting. Let's do a spark test if we can. This is a perfect example of why you want to learn how to do scope testing when it comes to checking for spark, because look at the engine. Like, I can't even see anything. Now, granted, there's just a cover right here, and we can take this cover off, and there's probably 3 coils up front that we can look at, but there's 3 coils in the back that we can't. And rather than even going here, I'm interested in what all of the coils are doing, not just one of them. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to go to the fuse box and see if I have a direct ignition coil fuse. I have an ignition fuse, 15 amp. I need to pull up a diagram here. Codes only. Do we have codes? No codes. History codes. All kinds of history codes. Catalyst, evap. Nothing that would be a no start. Let's see, pending codes. No pending. Okay, engine performance, 3.3. 6 pages. Thank you very much. Let's see, B+. So we have grounds. We could use that ground. Right rear of engine. Can I see them? Oh, hell yeah, right here. So what I'm looking at, guys, was right here on this ground on the screen, this E8 ground. It's a dotted line, so there's other things that use that ground, so it might be a little bit noisy, but I might be able to see what I want to see right there. So that's the plan. Again, we're trying to go for speed here. The camera slows us down tremendously, but I'm going for speed because of what we're dealing with being an intermittent issue. It's important that we catch it. Okay, what do we got? Time base. This is where you need to know your lab scope, guys. I got some lab scope training on SD Premium. You guys definitely want to be part of that. Even if you don't own a Snap-on lab scope, all of this stuff is universal. Time and voltage scales. Longer time base for cranking is what I want. I want to see consistency in this. And I might want to set peak detect. So that just ups my sample rate. Let's see what this looks like. I have no current flow here to these coils. And it went upside down, so let's invert that. There's a couple. Hold on, let's see. Let's go 10 amp. We're gonna change our time base to longer. Let's go 1 second screen. Got no coil control right here at all. Coils are not firing. So now I at least have confirmed that. Again, I smell fuel, so we're assuming injectors. I don't need to go that direction, although we could if we wanted. No reason to. We have a problem right here, and we walk this path, it'll lead us to where the problem is. I guess my point there is there are many paths that one can take in a situation like this. And when you find a known problem, which we found, I have no current flow here, we'll stay this path and it'll lead us to the promised land. There's one fire, there's three firing events. I hear it popping out of the back now. Oh, how strange. Let's go to 20 amp. So there is some coil firing events on that crank. None right now, none at all. Let's watch it again. When I heard some popping, I had some coil firing events. How cool is that? All right, so this is input related, most likely. It could also be no power to the coil. So my next step is I want to make sure that I have voltage to these coils. I got to pull that cover off. Okay, second channel, we'll go volts. Power feed is the white with a red. That's going to be that guy right there. Oh, that's awesome. If that's a legit reading. So anytime I expected to see voltage, I didn't see voltage, so I'm gonna take my meter, go over here and make sure that I can read voltage. And I am not. Always do that, always do that. Why? Because now we're gonna start chasing no voltage to these coils, and that might not be the problem. What's the problem in this circumstance? What am I holding in my hand? My ground lead for my multimeter that I didn't hook up. Things you can miss along the way. Like, you always got to check yourself. Always, always, always. And in this case, we expected to see voltage. Snap on their leads. We expect to see voltage on this coil. It wasn't there. Before I start chasing that problem, we make sure that our meter can read. 11.9. Okay. Oh, 5 volts is not enough. Wait, is that the right wire? White, red. Nope, that could be the IGT. Oh, sorry. That's the IGF circuit. So wrong wire there, Danner. Looks like black and red is the feed. The ground is what? White, black. Okay. So you see the black, red better on this one, the tracer. I want to see 12 volts on that. And then I want to make sure that that's maintained when we're cranking. I don't want to just say, okay, we're good. Loaded circuit type stuff. Wow. That voltage is dropping low, but that's just because of weak battery and whatever it was doing there, timing wise. We are maintaining battery voltage. This gets a little bit more complicated now because I gotta look at cam and crank signals. So there's a cam sensor right here. That's one of the cam. There's probably got 2 cam sensors and a crank sensor. Probably got one on the back cylinder head as well, because I see a VVT solenoid right here. 2 VVT solenoids. That's the back head, the one that Caleb's showing right now. And that means there's gonna be 2 cam sensor signals. That one's gonna suck to get to. I can get to that one. Looks like I have a harness that runs up this way. I could grab my crank signal here. Possibly the crank sensor is down there. Yeah, this is a shielded wire, so that means this is gonna be a variable reluctance type sensor. You see the sheath that's over top? Yeah. Not the yellow black, but this one. That's gonna be your crank sensor wires. And to access that, you don't wanna cut this open because it's a shield. So these are all gonna be variable reluctance sensors. 2 wire, makes its own voltage. Chapter 20, 1 material, people. So that just makes my job a little bit more difficult as far as looking at cam and crank signals. We may want to do this at the ECM, but the ECM may be inside the car. We got to pull things apart to get to it. I don't think I want to go that route. Let me take a look at the diagram. I mean, we should check the ground too. You guys might be thinking, well, why aren't you checking the rest of the coil signals? We can do that. I believe that this is not necessary, just on a gut, but let's do it. This one will be this is the ground now I'm going to. It's the white and black wire. Okay, we're gonna check that guy. It's gonna be a ground to ground voltage drop test. Look at your green trace signal. In the edits on that last test, you guys are gonna notice that battery voltage dropped pretty low on the crank. And the reason for that is the battery's very weak to begin with. And then the other thing that happened is you heard that the engine stop. It was like, whoa. And that was just because we had ignition taking place at the wrong time, and that stopped the crankshaft from turning, which made the starter amperage go through the roof, which made voltage drop even further. So you guys might look at that and say, oh, look at that voltage drop. That was from multiple causes: weak battery, incorrect timing, stopped the crankshaft, raised the amperage on the starter, which is why we saw such low voltage there. It was not a problem. Our voltage is not a problem. Okay, ground voltage test, green trace. Nothing wrong with that ground. 0.05. Now, you guys might be thinking, well, the circuit wasn't loaded, Danner, because coils never fired. You'd be correct. You'd be correct. But the coils never fired, and my ground voltage stayed at 0.05, so what is not my problem? Even though the ground wasn't truly technically loaded. That's right, the ground is fine. If the ground was bad, what would we see in that test right there? We would see the coils trying to be turned on, and ground voltage would have been elevated each time. Didn't see that. Our ground is fine. No reason to pull the ground off and clean it. These next two are IGT and IGF circuits. The IGT is the timing signal. The IGF is the confirmation signal. So notice the white, red, white, red, white, red. Those are my IGF confirmation signals. Those are the ones I mistakenly assumed was the power feed because they're all together. These white reds, see how all the white reds are tied together and they go off the screen to the computer. Those are your IGF signals. Notice white, black, white, black, white, black. Those are our power feeds. Sorry, those are our grounds. Black, red, black, red, black, red. Those are our power feeds. White, red, white, red, white, red, common wire, all IGF circuits. And then these are the IGT, so these would be the timing signals, each one being individual. Blue, blue, white, and pink. And just without a diagram, you can dissect that based on those colors. So we'll get an IGT timing signal. That's going to be the one the computer sends a 0 5-volt square wave to that wire to turn this coil on and off. And just going to show it to you guys. It's honestly pointless because we have no control based on our current clamp over here of all the coils. We have no control. So I do not expect to see a timing signal here either. And again, that's a signal to turn the coil on and off. We might see one on occasion. I couldn't see. I can't see out here. We need to go inside.
I've had these where it'll kill the IGF signal and kill them all. One coil will shut the whole thing down.
Oh, so I should monitor the IGF then?
I would.
Okay.
The confirmation one, whichever one that one is.
Yeah, yeah.
I've had them shut every one of them down because one went bad.
Bad coil.
You unplug that one and it starts.
Okay, I did have some excessive amperage. I want to go higher amperage, but does it do it automatically? It's like I need to put the jump pack back on it. I don't think I'm gonna hurt this. I just don't want to wait. I have some lectures on these Toyota systems. You'll find them in my chapter 22 playlist on ScannerDanner Premium on my website. But this design it's a 4-wire coil. The transistors are inside the coil. The timing signal that I'm testing now is going to be base circuit control. The computer is going to turn that coil on and off individually, each coil individually, which is why the wire colors are different. Trigger signal, base circuit trigger signal, right? The IGF that my brother was talking about, that was the white with the red tracer, that they're all the same. So all 6 coils tie together and is sent to a single wire to the computer. It's an ignition confirmation signal that when the coils fire, each of those coils will send an on-off trigger signal telling the computer the coil has fired. That's the one Danner was talking about, where he's seen the IGF circuit short and cause the whole system to shut down, no spark at all. So we'll check that IGF signal. I'm on the IGT still on this one individual coil, just to show you guys there's not going to be a trigger signal here. That sucks. There's your trigger signal. My amp clamp died. Turn this off, back on. We'll see amperage waveforms now. My ammeter's on a timer. Engine running. Let's change our time base down so we see kind of one of these events. And then what I'll do is I'll trigger, right now it's triggering off the yellow trace. I'll trigger off the green trace to hold it still. And the green trace is the turn on trigger signal of the coil. That's the computer turning that exact coil. So where the yellow trace is here, that green trace is turning that coil on. And that's the same one as over here. So we can honestly right now plug in our firing order and know exactly what's what. I'm connected to the middle coil up there. I don't know what cylinder that is, but let's just say it's cylinder 2, and the firing order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, back to 2. All those coils, the coils aren't shorted, but that's your IGT signal on one individual coil. The IGF circuit, it's this guy. Notice with the IGF that we have a triggered signal every time a coil fires. And they're all tied together with one wire. If you look at the diagram for the IGF, it shows every one of those coils. They all feed into the same circuit, white, red, next page, and notice it says IGF1. So what that means is all 6 coils, again, are firing, and when they fire, it triggers another circuit in the coil to tell the engine computer that ignition confirmation, that's what the signal's called, ignition confirmation has taken place. And those look great right now. To say that this is a timing problem, which it sure sounded like, a mechanical timing problem is probably not what this is. It's probably more like what my brother had mentioned. One of these coils, the IGF circuit that we're looking at in a green trace, potentially is an issue. Let's see if we can make it happen. So key on the IGF circuit, steady 5 volts is what we're reading. Wow, now it's a no start again. No ignition confirmation signal because no ignition event is taking place. You can see we lost coil control. No reason to go back to the IGT signal because that's the timing trigger signal on the one coil, because we can see in the amperage pattern that none of the coils are being fired. And now you see they are, right? So strange. Okay, I'm gonna look at some scan data now before we do cam and crank signals, because I'm trying to avoid that, because cam and crank is not gonna be very fun. Engine speed, let's look at that guy. How slow is this data? Oh goodness, it's like molasses. I'm gonna have to limit these PIDs. Look how slow that's counting. Let's customize this. I'm pulling in coolant and intake just to see some of the sensor data, throttle position, injector, ignition advance. We can do math, but I don't think that's really important. See if that sped the process up. It really didn't. It's still very, very, very slow data parameter updates on this. Of course, the car started. I'm not sure what this ignition number is. It's counting up to what? It's counting up to 594 and then back to 0. That's a weird number. I don't even know what that data parameter is telling me. There's now a no start, and I lose communication. Some of these cars, you will lose communication cranking, especially on some of the older ones, and that's not necessarily a problem. So strange. I gotta look at cam and crank. I have to. I'm just trying to get my cam crank signals here. I'm primarily interested in my crank, and I am questioning in my mind whether or not I have injection pulse. It really is irrelevant, I think. It's not really important for me to check injection.
In a little bit here, I'm going to want to switch batteries.
Well, this would be a good time to do it. So as Caleb's switching batteries, I'm going to stop this recording. I'm going to get hooked up to the cam and crank signals, and then we'll pick this back up in a minute. Can I say that? I shouldn't swear, but I was just swearing off camera that this probe, Phil's probe, is the best probe on the market. I know I keep saying that, but it's true, because check this out. Look, the end of this probe has a little screwdriver type thing on it, so I can get down in here, in between the two wires, right between it, grab it, hook it on the crank sensor. What I failed to show you guys real quick on the screen here is the crank sensor. It's a variable reluctance sensor, 2-wire. That's what tells me that. Some fundamentals you guys need to learn. That's chapter 21. 2-wire sensor makes its own voltage, and then the shield is the brown wire. I'd mentioned that to you guys. We don't want to cut into that shield. That's what that is right there. That's a shield. Which wire do you want to go to? In general, we want to go to the positive wire. And so look, it says NE positive. It's the red wire. That's why I'm hooked up to the red wire down there at the sensor. If I go to the NE negative, that's crank sensor negative, we may not have a signal there at all. Some of these sensors will have a signal on both the negative and positive, while others will only have a signal on the positive. So when in doubt, which one do we pick? Always the positive. So that's the crank. The cam, I'm going to go on the front cylinder head, which would be bank 2. They call it a VVT sensor, and it looks like they all share a ground. Notice the wire is still highlighted here, so that tells me for sure that the crank sensor is not going to have a signal on the ground wire because we're sharing grounds. The cam sensors share those same grounds, and what we have on the left rear of engine, so right rear of engine, that's weird. So what we have is a black and a white and a blue. What's weird about left rear, right rear is this is a transverse mounted engine. So what you do in that case, you put yourself behind the engine, like literally like you're straddling the transmission, you're riding the transmission. The left side of the engine, right? Left hand, right side, right hand. So the front of this engine is the left side, according to this particular, like that's what you have to do. It's weird, but that's the case. So it's black and white and then blue. I know since the grounds are shared, the black white wire is the one I want to go to for my cam. Okay, that's that wire right there, black white. So I should have a black white and a blue. All right, so I'm going after the black and white wire on the front cam just because it's easy to get to. Phil's probe. Okay, I no longer care about the timing signal. We know what's going on there. We'll go yellow trace to that guy. That's going to be cam. Caleb doesn't handle blood very well. So I just put this on my third channel. That's going to be cam. This is crank. This will be my coil firings. And notice how I have my grounds. They're all stacked outside. A lot of you guys will stack your grounds up here. Don't do that. Don't do that. Stack them external, right? The yellow trace has 2 grounds for a reason. By the way, we're gonna just keep harping on this, man. When I say research and on-the-job training, we should all be paid for this. Man, was that met with some very angry people? Rightly so, because you don't understand what I meant by on-the-job training and research. What are we doing right now? Do I know this Toyota 3.3 liter engine, cam and crank signal locations with wire colors, without service information, without research? Do I know that without research? Are you kidding me? And then on the job training, I get that. I probably shouldn't have used that term. Am I learning on this car right now? On the job training, that's what I'm talking about. I'm learning. Scope setup. Channel 1 is still good. Channel 2, we're on a 20 volt, that works. Probably drop that down to a 10. No, we can leave it at 20. Channel 3 is now also gonna be a 20 volt. I'm gonna turn peak detect off channel 1. I just don't wanna eat up too much of the buffer is what I'm thinking about here. As far as trigger goes, it's auto. This probably, I want this on a 1 second time base. I might want peak detect turned on for that. I will still for the amperage pattern, just so we can see when the coils are firing. Before I crank this, I want to look at my belt over here and make sure my probe's not going to get into the belt. Nope, it's perfect. This is the 18-inch probe. Perfect probe for this application. It's okay, I wanted it to start because that'll allow me to set these scales up better. All right, so the amperage pattern's sort of in my way. All right, I'm seeing something goofy on the crank. Let me peak detect that. Which one did I say the cam is? Crank is green. Sorry, it's the blue channel's crank. You guys are gonna have to forgive me from this point because my colors are different up top than they are on the screen, okay? The blue trace is my crank. The yellow trace or the green trace is my cam, not by colors of the probes. This is where the Pico is much better because I could shrink this amperage waveform down further. I could lie to my scope and tell it I'm using a 60 amp one and then put this on a 60. No. I want to get that out of my way. And you know what I'll do is I'll just, I'll turn that off for now. Go back to 20. And until I need it, I'll just turn it off. We'll look at cam and crank together. We'll peak detect both of these. And then I want a much smaller time base because I want detail and repetition. And I'm really interested, actually at this lower time base, I can turn this sampling off so it's not so noisy. I'm really interested in that gap. Can you guys see the gap in the crank? That's the one, like we really need to see this. That's an awfully weak crank signal. Like weak as far as, see how much amplitude is on the cam in comparison to the crank?
Yeah.
Like min-max voltage on the cam, let's get that. Like, it's hugely different. Let's stop this, reset those. Yeah, the cam is peaking at plus and minus 3.5 volts and the crank is only peaking at like one volt. And when the crank signal, when these VRS signals start to shrink to a point where they won't be read, like plus and minus 500 millivolts is about the minimum you want to see. And those signals should grow with RPM. So watch it, when I raise the RPM, if I raise the RPM, the signal should grow in amplitude because that's a characteristic of this sensor is with speed, amplitude will increase. Yeah, see how much higher the cam signal is? And the crank signal is sort of increasing, but not like it should be. This might just be a faulty crank sensor.
Oh, really?
Well, I mean, only because face value right here, Danner, this, look how weak the crank signal is compared to the cam. And just...
Oh, you're like under 2?
Yeah, your min-max here, let me reset it. Look, your min-max right here. Your max is 1.2 and max is 1.3. It's compared to the cam that's 2.8 and 3.1.
Yeah.
The characteristics of these two is the faster the signal, the higher the amplitude, and so the cam should be less than the crank, if anything.
I've run into that on Fords.
A weak crank.
Yeah.
So what?
Causing misfire codes.
Yeah.
And all kinds
So
of stuff.
it might be not seeing it properly. You know, does that explain why I smelled fuel? I did smell fuel, but I'm assuming the injectors were firing the whole time. They may not have been. We did have random firing events. When it goes wonk is when it's firing, but it's the wrong time.
Yeah.
So it could just simply be, although at the same time, Caleb, we did have an RPM signal, didn't we?
Yeah, because the dash
But
is moving. I can see the tack moving.
The tack was moving, and I did see it on the scan tool too. I'm just assuming right now that this is maybe a problem. Could it be an actual timing issue where we're one tooth off? I'll see if I can get a known good waveform and we can compare. I'm only looking at the front head too now. But I want to see this when it's not starting. See if we can make it do it. I need this up here so I can see it.
You want me to crank it for you?
Yes, please. That'd be awesome. Super weak when you were cranking. Hold on, let me go back. I want you to see this. Look how weak this signal is cranking. Right here is where you're cranking it.
Oh, that's like nothing almost.
So
damn, you're like a half a volt.
Yeah, let me go back. Let me go back. That's where you start cranking it. Look how weak the crank signal is. Here, let's get a cursor in here. Let's get a measurement.
Yeah, and some of them aren't even as high as the other ones.
There's a peak and here's a valley, and where are we at? So look at down here where it says cursor 1 and cursor 2.
Yeah. The
cursor 1's 0.68 peak and 0.22 as a valley.
Yeah. Now wait,
I
hold on.
just moved it.
That's
by
all right.
accident.
But look at that one. That
the
like,
sync notch.
Huh?
Oh, like this
Yeah,
one.
like
you want to
where's
look
that at?
You want to look at that one?
Yeah. Look
That's
how
like
low it
that's
is.
like a no signal at all.
I know.
So 1 and 2. So blue trace, 0.54 and 0.18.
So it's like a half a volt. That's not enough.
No, it's not. That's a minimum. In my book, I teach a 500 millivolt minimum.
You need to put in a ka-ching sound right there.
But I think maybe what's happening here is
It might have counted that as the sync notch,
exactly.
and then all of a sudden it's there.
It needs to see the sync notch here to be able to coordinate firing events properly, and it's very possible that
Right in that area where it went.
well, this is super small, and where did it start? You know, it started over in here, and you see it, the signal grow. I just think this signal's super weak, man.
And that would probably make sense why I couldn't get it to start with a jump pack, but whenever I put a battery charger on it,
That's
would
exactly
start.
what happened to us. In fact, I got the jump pack and the battery charger on it.
Yeah, but it didn't start till I had the battery charger on it for like 10 minutes.
Do you know why? Cranking speeds.
Yeah.
The slower the signal, the weaker the signal, and it's already a weak signal. This is classic weak crank sensor. Variable reluctance sensor. That's like me slapping this car. That's what I was doing. I don't know what that was. All right, I'm gonna take this capture again. I wanna get it where it's not starting. Let me take the battery jump pack off of it. What we could do too, probably come back for the final. I don't think we need to stay because it'll be a while before that gets done. But we assumed injectors were firing the whole time. That might not be the case. Even though we smelled fuel, we know the injectors were firing sometimes because the coils were firing sometimes. So that would explain the fuel smell. But we can check, remind me, Caleb, before we wrap up, if we can get this to consistently not start again, as I can show injection pulse just to see. Damn it. So let's turn the charger off. Nice. As soon as I shut the charger off, this would be where it started. And then this would be where I turned the charger off, and then we're cranking it over right here. And that signal is so freaking weak. That is not enough, people. It's not. There is no reason for me to go any further with this issue. Let me turn my cursors on, we'll get a measurement. It's just not enough for the computer to see it. I mean, look, let's measure, we can measure that one, that's pretty low. So 0.16 and 0.4. And when you're cranking this over, how important is this sync notch? This sync notch is what coordinates the cam and crank signals together. It's not seeing it. It's not seeing it at all. It's not seeing it. And then on occasion, it would see it, and then you'd get that, you know, kind of kick. We could redo this shot now and turn the yellow trace back on so you guys can see. The computer's not doing anything with this crank signal. Fire in the hole. Ah. Amp clamp turned off. Turn that back on. Oh, that's gonna be a great shot. Okay, pause. Zoom out. Oh, that's awesome. There you go, right there. Random firing events of the coils. Yellow trace. So you'd want like a nice consistent pattern over here. That's with the engine running. This is where I shut it off, and this is where I started cranking it. And you see like the inconsistencies in those patterns. Yeah, look at that. That's crazy. This area is where it went. Over here, it looks like you got like a couple of coils firing at the same time, maybe. Just the computer, look how weak that signal is. Let's get a measurement on that. Let's see, blue trace, 0.44 to 0.19. Peak 0.44, valley 0.19. That's not enough. And at the same time, if you want to compare like what the cam signal looks like, let's do a measurement on the cam, you know, just to get an idea difference. Peak and valley of the cam. This is green trace, 1.5 positive, -1 volt negative. So it's 2.5 volts peak to peak. 2.5 peak to peak.
Is that about what you want to see?
Every car is different. RPM and frequency will dictate it, because as you raise the RPM, the signal will grow. Characteristics of the sensor will dictate it too. But the speed at which this crank signal is moving is much faster than the cam based on signals. That should be higher. Not necessarily based on construction, but it should be higher than what it is. I always teach minimum 500 millivolts peak to peak. We're at 0.4 and 0.1. We're only 300 millivolts on that last measurement, where the cam is 2.5 volts. Now here's the thing about this signal. I have some case studies in my book where we talk about this. This is chapter 21 with a weak crank signal and what it can do. And what you'll see is the signal, the min-max, so it's an AC sine wave, the whole sine wave is not used. We only use a threshold in the middle. And the reason for that is that signal will grow and grow and grow with speed. We don't need the rest of the signal. We only need it to cross that threshold. And that's that 500 millivolt number I teach. This is not reaching that threshold, and it's not being seen. So if this is my threshold, the signal is falling inside of that threshold. Even though you still see the signal, it's not being recognized because it's inside of that. We have to be above and below that threshold for it to be, quote, seen. To take an AC signal and convert it to digital with an AD converter, it has to cross a certain threshold. Weak crank signal. I would imagine with this, we would also see the injectors dropping out too, and we can show that. I'll just take my cam signal. I'll go right after one of the injectors now that I can get to it. Injector wire colors. Which one is the control wire? Well, look at the two that I see. There's a black-red wire there. There's a black-red wire there. That means that the green wire is going to be my control on this injector. Okay, don't need a diagram, just moving from the cam sensor to the injector on that one. Green trace is now my injector. What I want to do is change that to 100 volt because it's a fuel injector to see our spikes, and that should be good. Let me make sure my amp clamp is still on. Cranking it. Let's peak detect the fuel injector. There's your one fuel injector pattern, engine running. Let's see if we can get this to do it. Let's see what that looked like. This is irrelevant what the injectors are doing here. Just want to see if within this pattern that we're seeing what I think we're going to see. Yeah, I'm making the call, Danner. Put a crank sensor in this thing. Okay. I didn't have peak detect turned on the crank, so we're going to have some goofy crank signals here, but I need an area where I'm still cranking. Yeah, we're losing both spark and injection pulse because look, we're still cranking it here based on the crank signal, and we're losing both spark and injection pulse, which makes more sense to me on what we're calling here.
So are you losing it as like part of the strategy to...
Well, yeah, I mean, injection pulse and ignition is highly revolving around the crank signal, and without a crank signal, you're typically not going to have either one. Mm-hmm. Okay, this last area is really what I want to look at right here. It looks like, yeah, we have very sporadic coil firing events. That's where we could hear it putting out of the tailpipe because it's just firing at the wrong time. And there is injection pulse taking place too, but it's also sporadic. And in here, you can definitely see an area where I'm continuing to crank, like that crank sensor, and it just, in fact, we like lost power to the injector. If you look at this area, we went from 12 volts. That means that relay is actually shutting off. That makes sense. We lose, Toyota always did that with their circuit opening relay. You're powering your injectors up, right? Fuel pump injector circuits. There's voltage in here, and then I'm still cranking. It didn't do the part. How do I know that? Because I still see a crank signal in here. But then look at your voltage for the green trace, where cursor 1 is 0.1, negative 0.1. So we lose voltage to the fuel injector because the relay shut down. Yeah, this affected both injection pulse and spark. What a freaking awesome case study. This is a faulty crank sensor. We'll pick this right back up with a new crank sensor in. We'll hear this car running. We'll take some after waveform measurements and wrap this one up. I just wanted to mention one more piece in case I forget, and that is when you see a variable reluctance sensor, permanent magnet, pulse generator, lots of different names for this type of sensor. It makes its own voltage with a permanent magnet, and it has a conductor, and we need motion, and we move the magnetic field back and forth with a reluctor to make the AC sine wave. When you have this type of signal and you have a weak amplitude, which is what we have, amplitude is min-max voltage. When you have weak amplitude, you want to move your scope ground to sensor ground, not battery ground, to be sure that you're getting the full amplitude of that signal. And when you'd want to do that, this is when you have a sine wave on both positive and negative wires, and if you don't use the negative wire, it'll cut that amplitude in half. How do I know that we didn't need to do that on this one? Was because the grounds were shared between the cam sensors and the crank, and so that means those are equal to battery ground, and so I didn't need to do that test on this car. Just wanted to clarify that. I do talk about this stuff. It's really, really important foundational info, and again, that's chapter 21, this image you're looking at right here, with a sensor that has a signal on sensor negative, and I call this a floating ground type sensor. That is not what we're dealing with on this Toyota. That weak amplitude that we have is a sensor issue, or it can actually be an air gap problem, but in our case, air gap is not adjustable or even able to be checked on this design without pulling the sensor. We're putting a sensor in it. Okay, so air gap is another one. When you have a weak signal, check this image out. This is off of an anti-lock brake sensor that has rust on the mounting point of the sensor that lifted the sensor off of its seat just a little bit, and then we had an air gap issue, and you see how much different the signal is before and after adjusting that air gap. So air gap is another one you have to consider. I am not worried about air gap on this one either. Just wanted to talk about those variables in case we forget when we put the new sensor in and show you the signals. Wanted to talk about those other variables.